Hello, this is John Pernay from Ion Annapolis and the Maryland Crabs podcast with a special election crab cake episode for your listening pleasure. In June, we held a mayoral forum that was very, very well attended, and you can, and quite honestly you should, go listen to that one, and you can find it on themarylandcrabs.com. But today, we bring you the voices of all of the other candidates running for Alderperson. Well, all but one of them. Republican candidate for Ward 1, Larry Clausen, did not respond to any of our requests. While we would have liked to have presented a forum or a debate with these 17 individuals, it just wasn't practical. So, we took it to the road so you can learn a little bit more about each of them in order to help us all make an informed vote. All of the questions were essentially the same to keep it fair, and we are releasing them all at the same time. Tune in and listen as your candidates answer some crucial questions about the city of Annapolis and how they plan to handle it should they be successful. Thanks for listening, enjoy, and be sure to vote. We're continuing the coffee shop tour today. We started out at City Dock down at Main Street, and then we went to the ceremony out on West Street to speak with Alderman Pindell Charles, and now we are down here at Zoo Coffee. And we're with Alderwoman Sheila Finlayson. How are you today?
I'm pretty good. How about you?
Good. A beautiful day. No rain, no humidity.
Absolutely.
We will take it. And we are running into a primary election soon.
Yes, we are.
Well, I'll tell you, let's just get into it. I want to just learn a little bit about you, the candidate, about you, your ward, and what you're seeing. You have been an alderwoman for how many terms?
10 years.
10 years. Okay, so that's 2.5 terms.
Right.
You came in a special election.
I did in 2007.
Okay, and who was in your seat then? Was that
Wayne Taylor?
Wayne Taylor, okay.
Yes. There were 2 seats available, and Ross Arnett and I both won those elections. I was approached around Thanksgiving to pursue the seat. Had not been on my radar at all to run for public office. I had just stepped down as president of the Teachers Association a few months prior to. And the seniors and elders in the community called and said, you have a responsibility to step up and do this. And I couldn't tell them no. And so it was the best election in the world because I said yes around December 1st. The primary was January 2nd and the general was January 31st of 2007. So 2 months, done.
Well, as you go around, and obviously you're campaigning now, you've been representing the ward for 10 years. What do you find in Ward 4 is the single most pressing issue specific to the ward, if there is something?
Well, I guess the primary concern is crime. You know, I ran on a platform of public safety and particularly youth violence in the community. And of the homicides that have occurred in the community over the last year, it's been a group of young men fighting between 4 different communities. Now, even though their targets were one another, it lends a feeling of unsafeness, insecurity to the ward. Because when these young men are shooting at one another, they don't aim very well. So they hit cars, houses, and fortunately, knock on wood, we haven't had any stray bullets that hurt people. But it is still frightening for the community. So I believe that's a number one concern in the community. At the same time, I know that the police have been able to target who these guys are. They've been able to solve most of the homicides and shootings in the community. Because it is these groups, and they're aware of who they are. And, you know, some of my students have told me they can even predict which community is going to be next. So that's a big thing. And the other piece is what our young people are doing, especially in their spare time. You know, when they're in school, there's one thing. And then when they're not, like summers, idle mind breeds problems, you know. So that's another big issue for me in my community.
What do you, and obviously you don't just represent Ward 4, you represent the entire city. Do you feel that the issues that are of concern to your ward carry over specifically to the city, or does the city have additional issues that need to be added in?
Well, you know, I'm glad you said that I represent others in the city other than Ward 4, because I do. You know, I grew up here, I worked here, I taught school here for many, many years. My church is still in Eastport. Annapolis is my home, and so people know me from every walk, from every ward. And so when there are problems, I get calls regardless of what ward it's from. And I respond because I know the people, I know the families, I know the circumstances. Crime is an issue everywhere. Housing and lack of adequate housing is an issue throughout our city. You know, I have worked with any number of developers who want to come in and put up McMansions. Well, that's not what the city needs. The city needs housing so that our police officers and our firefighters and our teachers and our nurses can live in the city. You know, during my tenure on the council during Ellen's administration, I had brought in a gentleman from Coldwell Banker, and I can't think of the real estate company, to create a program to help firefighters and police officers live in the city. And at the time, I thought we were going to be able to come up with some funding to help us with that program, and it didn't come to fruition. So that's one of my hopes, that at some point we'll be able to provide, you know, I had a banker willing to give them good rates on mortgages, and another realtor was willing to help with finding housing in the city that was affordable for what I call workforce housing. So, you know, that's the kind of thing that we need to bring our staff, our department heads, our employees, our public safety officials, and our teachers, and as I said, nurses, into our community to live, not just to work, but to live.
One of the big buzzwords going around Annapolis lately, for aside from Market House, which has sort of taken over the conversation of late, but development. We've got Providence Point, which is formerly called Crystal Springs, which sits squarely into your ward, with impact marginally on your ward as it is because it's on the south side, and Eastport Landing. What is your position on development in general in the city? And you do have some development in Ward 4. You've got Rocky Gorges.
Oh, Rocky Gorge.
That's part.
That's in my ward.
Okay. Where do you stand on development?
Well, first of all, growing up in Annapolis, I saw people's property, and particularly I'm talking Eastport now, because that's where I grew up, whose properties were taken or they were forced out for whatever reason. So I'm a strong proponent of people's rights when it comes to their property. Now, at the same time, I have a healthy respect for the fact that we all have got to live together on this planet. So that means that we've got to do things to preserve our forest. So there's got to be a way to compromise. And I trust that our planning department will give us the right guidance so that that balance will remain intact. You know, we are a city, and cities have people. And unfortunately, people now have more and more cars. So what do we do about addressing the number of cars that people have? I would dare say no one wants us to say you can't have more than X number of cars. That's ridiculous. So we've got to find a way to coexist. You know, I look at the Pearl Town Center, which could have been annexed into the city, but it wasn't. And I remember the fear that was spread about how terrible that would be for the city, the county, that parking would be bad, that traffic would be bad, and none of those things have come to fruition. And I have to believe that that's because the planners knew what they were doing when they planned that development. And if you go to the town center, and I go out there probably not frequently, but I visit it, I've never been in a traffic jam there. So I've got to believe that if there's a project coming into our city, that our planners have the same level of professionalism to make sure that the surrounding communities have the same ease of congestion, traffic, and so forth. You know, when Forest Drive was expanded, a year or so ago, 2 years ago, I got lots of calls from the community. And I shouldn't say lots. I probably got 5 to 10 calls. And they all said, what are you people doing? How dare you put a median strip in? You know, you're going to wreck the road. You're going to create more traffic. And it worked because those people who designed the new road knew what they were doing. It worked. What they did for that section of Forest Drive worked. And while traffic is still heavy, we can't control what happens at the other end of Forest Drive. And there is no control over development at this end of the road. So how do we, that's our greatest dilemma. This area of the county can grow as much as it wants to, but the city has to bear the weight of all the traffic going through to get down here. Our tax base isn't growing. And you hear from my colleagues all the time, all of us, about our constant need to raise revenue to cover costs. Costs go up every year, and we have to do something to generate additional revenue, or we have to do something about cutting services. So what is it that the residents want? And I've asked our administration on any number of occasions to do a survey. We tried as a council, to determine our core values. So we could decide where we should put our funds. And we couldn't come up with a decision between the 9 of us. And so I've asked for a community survey to ask the community exactly what you value the most, where you would like for your tax dollars to go. I know surveys in the past have said they value most public service. They value the police. They value fire. They value public works. We need another tool, another instrument that helps us to decide how we continue to move forward and fund our services.
As I'm talking to all these candidates, I'm not seeing a Democrat or a Republican sweep. There's not going to be any super councils, I don't think, this time around. I could be wrong, but you are running as a Democrat. But how do you reach across the aisle to get things done in Annapolis?
Well, we're local politics, and local politics hit closest to home. For example, I chair public safety, but on that committee sits Fred Payon, a Republican on the council. And his views on public safety aren't much different from mine. He believes in supporting police and fire and emergency preparedness almost just as much as I do, if not as much as I do. On our level, it's what hits closest to our citizenry, our residents. And I think we're a lot closer in that respect because it's local politics. So it's not so much a Democratic position or a Republican position. Now, I say that, but it really depends on the issue too. When it comes to nonprofits, I'm supportive of us continuing to fund nonprofits because I know nonprofits pick up our slack. They pick up those things that we can't do, whether it's manpower or revenue. And my colleague on the other side is totally opposed to us funding nonprofits. So, there are some things that we're going to be very different about. But I think, I don't want to say core, but there are many things that we're very similar when it comes to dealing with.
You are one of the more vocal members of the city council. When somebody says something that you disagree with, you typically don't have any problem letting them know that you disagree with them. Mm-hmm. Much more, I would say much more so than everybody else on the council. What, as you look back on the last 4 years specifically, because you've got some history behind you, but the last 4 years, this administration, this particular council, what has been the one or two things that have happened that you're like, this was wrong, this was a boneheaded move, this was the wrong decision for this council to do?
Well, that's a tough one. I don't know. But let me speak to my vocal responses first, and then maybe something will come to my mind. I'm a retired educator. And let me change that. I do have a problem with people disseminating inaccurate information. Maybe that's from my days as a teacher and helping kids to understand right and wrong. And when it comes to somebody spewing something that is blatantly inaccurate, I feel the need to correct it, because if it's not corrected, it will perpetuate, that misinformation will perpetuate. So yeah, I tend to want to correct misinformation that's presented so that we don't repeat that habit of doing that. You know, I'm trying to think of one thing that was focal, and I can't think of anything. What do you have in mind?
Well, that's fine. Then it might be a testament that this council does a decent job of working together and getting things done.
Mm-hmm.
We can make the argument that the city is darn near broke or flush in cash, but let's, for a moment, look at the worst. We are on the precipice of insolvency, bankruptcy, whatever you want to call it. What if we were, and nobody thinks that we are at this point, but if we ever get to that point, what do you as an alderman look at? How would you look to try to start to right that ship without letting it go into insolvency?
Well, first of all, we're not close to bankruptcy now.
Right.
You know, we've got cumulative, probably well over $60 million in rainy day fund, surplus, whatever you want to call it, in a number of different places. And that has been accumulated through a series of actions that we took during the previous administration, which is what we'll have to address again. I guess it was back in 2010, it had to be 2011, 2012 maybe, during Mayor Cohen's administration, absolutely. We embarked on a project, a bargaining process called interest-based bargaining. I brought it to the city. I had used it with Anne Arundel County Public Schools. It's also known as win-win bargaining. We knew at the time that our police and fire pension was grossly underfunded and that we had to do something about it. And we kind of mulled over how we could address it. And so I introduced, not for the first time, that we should use interest-based bargaining. And in interest-based bargaining, you bring everybody around the table. So we had all 4 unions in the room. We all had to go through significant training because it's a completely different mindset of bargaining. It's not adversarial, which is traditional bargaining. Mm-hmm. And that's the bargaining that everybody in the room was familiar with. If they were familiar with bargaining at all, they knew traditional. And so we embarked on interest-based bargaining. It took us 13 months because it's a very long and laborious task. But everybody has to expose everything. And the mission is to get to a point where everyone can agree to what's needed and how you get to solving whatever the problem is. So our number one problem was our police and fire pension. Number 2 problem was the contributions for health care that had not been addressed. When I came on the council, my first summer, I learned that we were flush in our contributions, so we were not going to ask employees to contribute anything to their health care, which, in the long run, that's not a good plan for sustainability. So anyway, during this 13 months of bargaining, we were able to shore up the police and fire pension by increasing contributions from not just the employees, but the city. The city was contributing about 3.5%. We got over a 4-year period, we got our contribution up to, I think it's 18% now. The employees went from 3.5% to 8.5%, I think it is. And I'll tell you, we started, of course, they brought other issues to the table. And the first thing we bargained was the DROP program. Are you familiar with the DROP?
Yes.
Well, my team, the management team, did not want us to bargain that first. And I insisted that we agree to the DROP before we did anything else, sending the message to the unions that we're in this together. And it worked. My colleagues fear that, once we give the DROP, they won't have any reason to stay at the table. But they stayed at the table for another 12 months with us. And we were able to, we gave them all the financials, no holes barred. So they could see exactly what we were dealing with as far as resources. So when we agreed to come up with additional monies to pay for our contribution, they were willing to do the same thing. When we looked at the numbers for healthcare, and we looked at prescription costs, what types of prescription, we looked at every detail, and everybody came to the conclusion that we all have to pay more. And so we did. So over that 13-month period, we mutually agreed upon all those things that would shore up retirement, health care, and we came out with pay increases, a 3-year 10% pay increase, which employees got like 1% in July, and 2% in July. So it equaled to 10% over 3 years. Because we knew that we hadn't given our employees a pay raise in 4 years. So we all agreed we had to do something. So we did that. And in doing that, the bonding agencies recognized, because they had told us, you have to do something to shore up your pension. You have to do something to shore up, your responsibilities to your employee. And so, and we had to show over a number of years. And that's why that 3 or 4 year agreement was so important, because they could see that there is a pattern. It wasn't a one-time, splash in the pan effort. It was a sustainable effort. And so that's why our bonding ratings have gone up now, because they've seen what we did starting back in, I think we agreed in 2013, October of 2013. We finally got all the language straight and all the contracts. That probably took 6 months to do all that. And we approved the contract October before the November election.
You've been doing this for a while, and this question is kind of geared toward the newbies that may be coming in and thinking about running for office. But how much time do you spend alderwomaning? What's involved in time on a week to spend on your alderwoman duties?
A lot. We give it our all. I mean, very few people spend 20 hours a week doing this. It's considerably more. But it's not an attractive position to pursue if you have a young family, if you have, other responsibilities or commitments. The money isn't going to supplement you enough to want to say, well, I'll do this.
How do you plan to increase, if that's the case, keep all of your constituents in Ward 4 up to speed on what you're thinking about what's happening within the ward, what's legislation and whatnot? How do you keep your finger on the pulse of the ward, and how will you if you're going to change it at all?
Well, I do have a website, SheilaMFinlayson.com. And I have a calendar there and, a gallery of pictures of events that I participate in. And so that's available all the time. And there's a contact section link on it so they can send me emails. There's a blog that I can't keep up with that I'm supposed to be writing on there. Try to do it every day, but nope, can't do that. I also am doing a newsletter. In the past, I've sent out newsletters sporadically. And that's something I'm going to try to do more regularly. Some of my colleagues have a newsletter they send out prior to each council meeting. And I'm going to try to do that this year. I have not done that in the past, but I've sent out email newsletters just as there's a need. I have an email list that I send information. So that's pretty much my communication, but always looking for other avenues. I go to a lot of community meetings. I go wherever I'm invited. There are some community meetings I go to and they have me come for the first 30 minutes and then they say goodbye because they want to carry on the business of their association. And I can respect that. I don't need to be involved in everybody's business agenda.
I want to get a little philosophical here. We've always heard about the desire to create one Annapolis. I think we can all agree that we would love to see that. I think we can all agree that we currently have two Annapolises, which is another buzz phrase that's been going around. Mm-hmm. And on one side of it, you've got wealthy, predominantly white waterfront mansion type folks on the one end of the spectrum, and on the other end of the spectrum you've got Hispanic or African American residents of public housing. We need to get into the middle at some point. It's not going to be accomplished by Alderwoman Sheila Finlayson in 4 years, or a council or a mayor in 4 years, but we can take steps to push the sides together. What do you see are what would you like to see as far as some of the steps to bring that gap a little bit, reduce that gap a little bit between the two separate Annapolises?
I think one of the primary goals should be housing, affordable housing. And again, this is what I call workforce housing, because our middle class is diminishing. You know, like you said, we've got the wealthy and we have the not wealthy at all. But we don't have any housing in the middle for anybody that can move up. So being able to control what stock comes into our city is important. And by stock, I mean what housing stock comes into our city. I think that's a big step. I think job opportunities is another big step. You know, I have a summer job fair 3 years ago, Annapolis Youth Summer Jobs. And today I still have summer jobs for young people. But I also, because several of the sites that I use are online and I registered, they think that I'm job hunting. So every day I get 10 or 20 new job opportunities. And they're not all for young people. These are permanent jobs. I mean, I got something a couple days ago from the medical center. They're looking for a practitioner. So there are job opportunities that we need to connect our residents to. Whether it's my program or another program, we've got to help them find jobs that will move them into a different level. Transportation is another issue. You know, we reduced the transportation to the college from 1 hour. Well, we didn't reduce the transportation. We reduced the wait time from 1 hour. We increased the wait time. We didn't reduce it from 1 hour to 2 hours. I oppose that because I think we should give our residents every opportunity to get a higher education so that they will qualify for better jobs. So between housing and transportation, and those are things that we have to help our community to bridge that gap. And at the same time, the folks on the other end, my hope is that they will give back. I have asked people to come into my ward to mentor young people, and they have. And it's a matter of being asked, you know, we need help here. I got a group of young men, they've got no positive role models. How can we address them? And I hear business leaders come to me and say that same thing. You know, how can I help in your community?
As we look into a primary election, what makes Alderwoman Sheila Finlayson run? Why do you want to do this? What is your background that you bring to the table? Obviously, aside of 10 years on the council, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I've been truly blessed to have had 10 years of working in the city with people who want to do good for our city. When I've needed anything, I've known who to go to get the help that I need. I mentioned National Night Out, and I was able to put that event together in 5 days. And from what I heard from public safety team, I had the largest crowd. And I had free food and music, entertainment, and giveaways, you name it. Chick-fil-A was there, Six Flags was there. I had a barber and a hairstylist there to give away free back-to-school haircuts and hairstyles. I had social services there, you name it. But that's because I have the experience of dealing with all of these people. They know my heart's in the right place. And so when I come to ask, they are very willing to accommodate me. So I bring the experience. I bring the ability to bring people together. When people approach me because they have a problem, my way of addressing it is to bring everybody together in the room. And if that means it's a city issue, then we bring in the city staff and we get everybody in the room, and then we clearly hear what the problem is. And then we all get to decide how we can resolve it. If it's a planning issue, and I get a lot of those, the planning department will say what we need to do to fix this. And then I'm on board helping them fix it. So consider myself a problem solver. I negotiated for, 12 or plus years with the school board as president of the teachers union. And so I have a skill set for negotiating. And I mentioned the IBB process that we use extremely successfully in the city. So I bring that level of experience. And of course, education is my core. I am the greatest advocate for education and the arts.
Where can we find out more about you? I know you said you've got or to get in touch with you, to ask you questions. I know you said you've got Sheila M as in Mary, Finlayson, and that's, I'll spell that for somebody. It'll be written on the notes when it goes out, but it's Finlayson. Is that the best way to get in touch with you?
Or my cell phone.
You don't have to give that out if you don't want to.
Well, I don't mind. It's 410-271-4173. That number I have with me all the time, and I appreciate. I've only had 2 nasty messages, and I think one was from a previous student because he didn't do well in my class, but that's another story. But
understandable.
I am free to talk to people and assist however I am needed. But my phone number I've just given, SheilaMFinlayson.com is my website. And please sign up for my newsletters that will be coming in September.
Ms. Finlayson, thank you very much for coming out on this beautiful day, sitting in Zoo Coffee down here on Bay Ridge Road or Avenue. I get that always confused, but next to the Giant. Good luck in the primary.
Well, thank you.
The general election.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
So there you have it. Answers from a candidate or alderperson in the city of Annapolis. Did they answer anything that was on your mind? If not, make sure you get in touch with them so you can make the best vote come September 19th in the primary election. Be sure to keep up to speed on the election at eyeonannapolis.net and also on the marylandcrabs.com. It is an important election this year, so it is so important to get out and vote. And speaking of voting, the primary is on September 19th and the general election is on November 7th. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. And after the primary, look for an announcement from us about a mayoral debate between the 2 survivors. Just like the forum in June, Eye on Annapolis and the Maryland Crabs will bring this to you, but this time it'll be structured more as a debate rather than a forum. Thank you for listening to this special election crab cake episode. Be sure to subscribe to the Maryland Crabs podcast. We have fresh stuff that drops every Thursday at noon.